Hello, welcome to Your Story Matters. My name is Yu. I'm the president of USKRG, and I will be running this presentation together with our vice president, Rob. We're first going to run the presentation, and we'll do it pretty fast because we know that your questions is probably going to be more important. Today, we also have Bunyong Han from DKRG joining us. She will be taking questions, and Bunyong is one of the founders of DKRG, and together with Peter, she was the first people to really bring light to the Korean adoption irregularities. Thank you to Bunyong for joining us. We also have Kelly and Michelle and David, our three other board members here, and they will be helping in the background, answering questions, making sure technical issues does not arise, except from my dinosaur technical capabilities. They can't help. We're recording this first part of the session, and during the question and answers, we will not record because we realize that there will be a lot of sensitive and private information shared. So we also ask that nobody shares these presentations without permission from us. So the topics we're going to cover today is we're going to try and give you more information about why adoptees choose to submit their cases to the TRC3. You'll learn the differences between submitting your case as an individual or as part of the KRG collective. We'll give you guidance on best practices for writing a good personal statement and summary for your case submission. So why should you consider submitting to the TRC? TRC is a human rights investigation. It's not an investigation of happiness. So if you want to know if your human rights were violated, that's a good reason to submit. Often it is because somebody suspects fraud in the adoption records, or that they were fabricated, or that parts were changed. It could also be that you want to know the truth about your identity, and you hope that the investigators will find more about your identity. And sometimes they will, sometimes they will not. It depends on each case. Sometimes they will contact you if they find more, and sometimes they will reunite you with biological family, but that is not a guarantee, and that is not the main purpose. The main purpose is about the human rights. So if you want to make sure that there was no illegal activities in the adoption, and if you want to make sure that if there was, that it comes to light, that's a good reason to submit. Some people like me, I want to do it because I want my human rights answered. I want the truth to come out. I want my biological family to know that I'm well. But because I want my biological family to know that I'm well, that is not a human rights violation. The human rights violation is that my adoption papers, several papers and steps have been missing. Another reason is that you're curious about your biological family's medical history. And we all have a right to know our own narrative and our own story. One important human right is that you have a right to your identity. So that is really important. Your TRC case will stand in history as a voice for justice. And I believe that holding those responsible, accountable, and preventing future adoption fraud is extremely important. And it also, by participating, you are getting a voice for yourself when you have been voiceless so far. So what will happen when you've submitted with DKRG? You will receive an email confirmation from DKRG as soon as you've submitted your case with them. If there's any cases missing, they'll contact you. If you have not signed up with DKRG, you have to email them, trc3@danishkorean.dk. Then you'll get a consent form, you fill that out, you send it back to them, and then you'll receive the application form and which email to send to the group, dividing us up in different groups. So it's very important that you stick to the right email that they give you. Then once you've sent your case and your application form, then you get the email confirmation with your case number. And then if you receive any further FOIAs or any more information, you can always update that by sending your case number to that same email. So DKRG and co-root, they're planning on compiling all cases and printing them out and hand delivering them with the first batch on February 26th. That is why they're asking to submit your cases by February 20th. We know that everybody is under a huge time constraint. So for now, if you can print out your application form and fill it out and send a copy together with your government photo ID so they can make sure you are who you say you are, then that is enough for now. And then you can always submit your timeline and personal statement and other documentation later. Send as much as you have now, and you can always finish the rest. The important thing is that we show TRC that we are the many and that they need to allocate enough resources for us. If TRC accepts your case, they will investigate it and they will send you a case number directly to you, not through DKRG, because DKRG is a blind submission. They will not know who you are. It's just a case number. And then TRC caseworker will contact you. So please make sure that you have your correct emails and telephone numbers in your documents that you send so they can reach you. So TRC, what type of cases are they looking for? There's no particular case types with TRC, and there's not any case that's too small. As long as there's any kind of evidence of illegal or fraudulent or suspicious activity that needs to be investigated. It could also be that you have already made contact with your biological family and you find out they did not give you up for adoption, or they coerced your biological parents. They promised your biological parents that they could see you, that you would stay in Korea, and you were still sent abroad without their consent. In the TRC2 round, the two overall systemic problems that was raised by Co-Root and DKRG, they were both ruled in violation of human rights. And those two cases were based on all the cases that were sent in. So that is a clear indicator that most of us have had human rights violations. 56 cases in the original compiling, they were concluded, and all of those were ruled in violation of human rights. 311 are still open, and we have been told that TRC3 is going to handle those first, and that is our request. And the indication is that they believe they will be able to handle them in the first 3 or 4 months if they have enough resources, because most of the investigation were already done. What are the benefits by submitting through a group like DKRG? You can submit individually. You will then have to do it yourself. You have to download the application form on the TRC3 website. There is already an application form, but that is Korean and that is intended for domestic TRC cases. They have told us that they are uploading an English form on February 26th, and you will then be able to download that form, and you will then have to either email it to them or to hand deliver it to TRC3 or TRC, or you have to hand deliver it to one of your embassies. That is also an option. If you deliver to your embassy, you have to set up an appointment first. And to set up that appointment, I would call them and find out how to set that up, because right now they still don't have an option to submit a TRC file. When you submit through the group, you'll get frequent TRC updates, both via email or Zoom, and we will be handholding. And we have a team in Korea that are in regular contact with the investigators and commissioners, and they can bring any issues up and they can talk to us about these things. What also happens is DKRG and Co-Root, they have already identified patterns within the system, so they will help write the case summary for you, so you don't have to do that, and your personal statement, so they'll make sure that your case has a high likelihood of being accepted. Due to the extensive experience of DKRG and Co-Root, they know what to look for, and they can also see if there's any other systemic issues, so we can have more overall systemic rulings, which will benefit all cats, not just yourself. And this is also important. Even if your case would get dismissed, you might be part of a systemic issue that they need to pinpoint. The new law with the TRC3 is that there's also a mandate that if they see any criminal action, they can hand it over to the Korean police and they can make a deeper investigation and the responsible people can be prosecuted. DKRG and Co-Root, they have very existing professional relationship with the TRC investigators and parliament members. So they will really make sure and work for you so that your case has the best chance of being seen and heard and that the right actions are taken. So more about the benefits issues that has arisen that people are asking about is what is the data protection when you email these? So we can't say what happens in your own computer and from your own email server. But all data is protected by EU's GDPR laws. They are the most stringent laws in data protection and privacy laws, much stricter than American and Canadian and Korean laws. KRG can never be bought off. So what we are meaning with that is we're in it for the long haul. There has been people who have offered the DKRG money to go away and to stop this. And DKRG has said no. We are in it for the long haul. We are in it for all the Korean adoptees. We're not going to leave any Korean adoptee behind who are submitting these cases. So we'll sit together. So you will be sitting beside others, and that helps building that larger narrative and patterns that we can see, and you're not alone. That's the important thing. This is submitting in solidarity and thinking about everybody and not just about your own case. KRGs can provide Korean language support as well. So if there's any follow-ups, if your investigator doesn't speak very well English, Co-Root and DKRG, they are willing to help, and they have been helping with language and translations. So that is a huge benefit, that you don't have to suddenly sit with that all by yourself. Because if you submit by yourself, you will not be getting those services from DKRG, from Co-Root. So the privacy concerns, back to them, and we have made a whole page about that on our website, so you can understand what are the different protections. DKRG, they have 3 data protection directors, and their only job is to make sure that DKRG are complying with the EU laws and GDPR. I don't think it can be any safer than submitting it through DKRG. And nobody will know that you submitted your case unless you tell them yourself, because according to GDPR laws, it's all anonymized and put in subsequent reporting in numbers. And even TRC, they suggested to anonymize with your first initial ... your last initial ... and DKRG was like, no, that is not safe, because people might be able to identify that you've submitted. So everything is just a number given by a computer, so that there's no way anybody can find out that you have submitted. Even within DKRG, if your case writer see, oh, there's some medical issues that needs to be seen by the medical team, they cannot just hand your case over. They are going to have to say to the medical team, there's a case here, would you like it? And if they like it, they have to send you an email, and you have to sign a new consent form. Because the DKRG adheres to GDPR laws, you can always email them and ask them to remove all your data and delete all your data and withdraw your consent, and they will have to do that within 30 days. You do not get that with AI bots here in America. So what outcomes can you hope for? You get access to your true files, hopefully, and identities, and you'll get more access than by submitting with NCRC. NCRC, for instance, don't have access to your child card, and everybody has a child card. TRC is able to find your child cards, and they will tell you a lot more about your origins. It's also helping to prevent future abuses in the international adoption system. So you help protect other children from being adopted without the consent of the biological families. We are now, with the new TRC laws, there's room for criminal prosecution at the private level and probably also at the institutional level. So that is a really big change in the law. And there's room for other outcomes. There's room for all sorts of forms of reconciliation or restorative justice. But the first 3 is the priorities. And first, we need to get the truth. Just like in a regular court case here, you don't get restitution, monetary restitution, by going to say somebody hurt you in the court. You have to first submit your proof. It has to be heard. So that is something that has to be done. The restorative process, that comes second, but it is about the human rights. But because we want the truth first doesn't mean that there's not going to be a reconciliation or restorative process afterwards. So the next slide is over to Rob.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rob Anderson. I'm the Vice President at USKRG, and I was apparently abandoned when I was 3 months old. Then I was adopted to the US when I was 2.5 years old, where I grew up in Minnesota. I tell you this because from the time I was 0 to the time I was 3 months old, I had one identity. From the time I was 3 months old, when I was taken into the institutions, to the time that I was 2.5 years old, I had another identity. And then from 2.5 years onwards, when I was adopted to the US, I had yet a third identity. So I know my second identity, I know my third identity, but what I don't know is my first identity, the one that I had for the first 3 months of my life, the one that actually has my actual birth name, my birth day, actually, and we could talk about birthdays later, but So that's why I wanted to get involved with the TRC. So I'd submitted under TRC2. And so basically, as part of your submission, you're going to be asked to provide a personal statement. And I want to just tell you why this matters. Because when I was growing up, I always thought of what my parents told me about my adoption as my adoption story. And story is a very loaded term. Uh, it's it sort of implies something fabricated, made up. Doesn't always, but basically, what we're saying is, you know what, your your adoption is not just a story, and the stuff that you have around it is actual evidence about what's happened to you, either legally or illegally. And by writing this down, you provide a written record, and this is something that can be um, retained by legal systems and stuff. So it's a very powerful tool to be able to start being able to collate. And this way it moves from being just a story to an actual record of what's happened to you. And you want to use your personal statement and sub support it by the documentation that you have, whatever documentation that you do have, or whatever little. I have very little from my orphanage. I have some made up files that I know they're made up from my adoption agency. And the reason I know that is because I found somebody else who was 2 years older than me. So I was 2.5 when I was adopted. She was 4.5, and yet our medical records and stuff were almost verbatim the same, even though I should have been behind in my development than this other person was. So basically, whatever documentation you have, whether it's fabricated or if it's real, uh, you should use that to support your personal statement. And then finally, it needs to move from, well, I've been told this, to this is documented evidence, and it moves beyond just a story, just beyond an anecdote, just beyond what people told you, into an actual factual record of what you know and what you don't know about your adoption story. So now if we move on, and basically I've been asked before, how do you start uh, writing your personal statement? And I actually did this the other way around. So my personal statement was first, and then after a couple of months, the TRC asked for a timeline. And I think doing it the other way around, where if you start with your timeline, because what that does, and when I created my timeline, I probably spent about 20 hours going through my records, and which is a lot considering I didn't have a lot of records. I had like 2 health records from the adoption agency. I literally had an intake sheet from my orphanage, and then I had my Freedom of Information Act pack that I got under from the USCIS. So basically, it took me pretty much about 20 hours to create my timeline. And we've done workshops because in the past, and they're recorded, so you can go to our website, uskrg.org, and see that if you want to. But because this is such a big process, we've done webinars on the timeline itself. So I'm just going to give a quick overview here about the timeline. And basically, you want to just list everything that is relevant to your adoption. And for me, out of my FOIA, I was able to find, hey, you know what, this is when my parents were first interested. My parents were first interested in adoption in on February 4th. And then like a day later, I got entered into the Holt adoption program. Was that coincidence? I don't know. But that's something that the TRC can start uh, investigating. It's things like that where, but you need to have all the dates, all of the things that are relevant to your adoption, and then do it in order. Make sure that, for me, I have like a contradiction in terms of the dates. So one of them says I went to the orphanage when I was 3 months old. My orphanage says I actually went there when I was 18 months old. I tend to believe the orphanage as opposed to the Holt, which was my adoption agency. But that was a clear contradiction. Uh, and then it's okay that you have reported events. So it's reported that I was abandoned when I was 3 months old. But I have no witness statements. I have no police records. I have nothing attesting to that outside of one little line on my intake form for Holt. My adoption agency has nothing on that. Or my orphanage had nothing on that. It was just literally one line from Holt. So that's a reported event, whereas documented, it's more clear. So had I been abandoned, uh, and had there been a police record that was associated with it, then that's a documented incident as opposed to a reported event. And it's very clear to draw that distinction because with documented, you can actually support it with evidence. With reported, it's sort of hearsay, and then the TRC can look at those two through those two different lenses. And then what I found is that with the TRC, the investigators are normally bilingual, so they'll be able to do English, they'll be able to do Korean, but it makes it a lot easier if when you're quoting things from your records, if you keep the original wording where possible, because it makes it easier to find and get the context of that. So with that, we'll move on to the next one. So when you're doing this, what you want to do, and this is the important bit, which is identify where your human rights might have been violated. So for me, I have no record, a police record of my being found. I have no witnesses to that, no witness statements. I have nothing in terms of evidence that they tried to find my birth family, which they were required by law to do. The consent. So basically, this applies to, let's say, the biological family. So when a biological family gives or relinquishes their right to the child, there should be a consent form. There should be evidence of the ID of the person who relinquished you. The guardianship records are basically referring to, okay, whoever has guardianship of you, did they actually go through the process of formally relinquishing that? In my case, it was the guardian for me was Chung Hao Bu. I don't know if he was director, but he was very high up in Holt. And anyway, he took on my guardianship, but he didn't take on any of the guardianship duties. He just did it in order to be able to give me away for adoption. So these are kind of the human rights violations that we're looking for. The identity, the nationality document. So did you have a proper family register? And with nationality, did you actually become a US or Canadian citizen? They had a duty of care to make sure that we didn't end up stateless, which has happened to a number of Korean adoptees. In fact, I think it was estimated that there were 30,000 in the US alone, somewhere around there, that don't have US citizenship. I'm not certain what the number is in Canada. So the examined timing of transfer and the adoption. I've seen cases where the person was found and then put up for adoption on the same day. And that's a red flag as well. And then any obstructions to getting your records. And what I mean by that is over the years, I've tried to get my records. I went to Korea in 1999 to get my records personally, and I got some. But then when I went to what was at the time post-adoption services in Korea, so government run, it was the precursor to NCRC, the National Center for the Rights of Child, that does all of your adoption records. When I went there to get a copy of my records, a very important page went missing from my orphanage. In fact, the only valuable page that was there. And the reason that this was so interesting for me was because that was the only document that I had that said I actually wasn't supposed to be adopted, and I was supposed to be under a period of special protection where I wasn't supposed to even be in the adoption process until September 1974, and I actually landed in August 1974 in the US. So I went through the entire adoption process before I was even supposed to enter it. So these are the kind of things that you want to look out for when you're writing your timeline. And then the next slide becomes about, okay, now that you have your timeline, now that you have all of the red flags and the potential human rights violations, now you start writing your personal statement, and you want to state with verified facts. The reason I'm saying this is because what'll happen is you have to build a foundation on facts. If you build it on a whole bunch of suppositions and guesses, what happens is if some of those prove to be untrue, then the whole thing could potentially collapse. And that we see that in the court of law. Not that this is going to be in a court of law, but what I'm saying is that you always want to start with the facts and build upon those. Present issues in logical order. What I always say to people is whenever you're talking about something, you want the audience is a very lazy audience, okay? They want things spoon-fed to them. And so by presenting issues in logical order in your personal statement, what that does is it enables the investigator to be able to follow along instead of you having to jump around and go back and forth. And I actually find that like a chronological order is good, or a thematic order is good. So basically, chronology, this is when things happened, this is when things were missing. The topical or thematic order is, okay, these are the things where there were concerns about my abandonment, okay? And then I list all of the things there about what's wrong there. And then you want to say, hey, why does this matter? Because, well, I have memories of being in a supermarket and being taken away, and none of what's recorded matches my memories. That's why this matters. And again, we go back to avoid speculation and exaggeration. So it's about keep this grounded. And then finally, you want to end with specific requests or goals. So basically, you say, hey, you know what? I really want to get to how did I actually come into the adoption system when I have clear memories of my family who love me? I don't. I'm just using that as an example. But so could you really focus on that? So these are the kinds of things you want in your personal statement, but basically it needs to be an overview of your case, why it should be accepted, and what are some of the things that you think some of your human rights that were violated throughout this process. Now, if we go on to the next slide, what this is it's a sample opening paragraph of a personal statement. What I would like you to do is read this, and I'll give you some time now, and tell me what your thoughts are on just this opening paragraph. So there are a few things that I had said before about, avoid exaggeration, start with grounded facts, stuff like that. But basically, show a pattern of failures and cover-ups. That's a supposition on your part, okay? Whoever the author is. There were no specific dates given, that's correct. Basically, they're making accusations at this point as opposed to stating facts. So important safeguards were ignored. and institutions involved either did not care enough to follow the law or chose not to. So a lot of these statements in this are very emotive. So it's very emotive language, and it's accusatory. This was not just sloppy paperwork. It was a reckless process that put my rights last and treated my life like an administrative task to be completed. So if I were an investigator looking at this, I would think you really have an axe to grind, and that may be the case. A lot of us have had real harm done to us through the adoption system. But what we want to do is not come across as emotional, almost unhinged people that have, really out for vengeance. So if we go to the next slide now, this one is a lot more neutral. It's a lot more grounded. And again, it's the opening paragraph, so it doesn't necessarily need to have background facts. It's just being able to position things. But basically, you're saying, hey, you know what? I I have a strong case of human rights violations. Um, I'm not just saying this. These are supported by the original documents, by the contradictions within the records, by the missing safeguards that should have been in place at the time. So for me, it was the period of special protection that was violated. But again, you say, hey, you know what? There were a whole bunch of minor things, but you know what? When taken together, they show that together, I had a lot of human rights that were violated and that they weren't properly protected. So this is a lot more grounded. So now if we go on to the last slide, basically what I'm trying to say is, again, you want to, whenever you're making statements, you want to back them up with key passages from your records. And again, make it easy for the investigator. So what you want to say is, hey, you know what, this was from this document, page 35. And then that way they can, if they want to go and investigate it a bit more, they can. Again, stick to the facts as opposed to the interpretation, and then avoid the emotive language, which is what the very first one was. Now, I'm going to quickly address some questions that were in the chat window.